So I was recently asked to cover my workflow when it comes to acoustic guitars. A couple of things you run into with acoustic guitar recordings are kind of boxiness in the low mids. There's sometimes a little bit of low end kind of rumble, and just kind of build up around the kind of 60 to 100 hertz area. And sometimes they can be quite dark sounding actually. You have to kind of boost a lot of the top end to get the clarity back. So if we look at the EQ on screen here, this is just the standard stock EQ in Studio One. I normally mix with a SSL strip, but to keep things simple, I'm just going to be using the standard issue stuff. I mean, you can do the same things in any EQ. So usually the areas I look for, problem areas I go to are kind of up to and around 100 hertz low cut. This is just where a lot of the kind of rumble is. And then you've got kind of boxiness kind of is in the kind of 320 to 500 hertz range, kind of somewhere. You just have to kind of scroll around and see if you can find it in that area. Occasionally you get it a bit lower, but that's really if it's a bigger bodied acoustic like a dreadnought size. You just have to kind of hunt in that kind of low mid range. And then a lot of the clarity is kind of in the 3.5 to 4K area, and I actually like to shelve just up from there. It just adds a nice kind of top end sparkle, which, that's down to taste and what the track is doing. In this track it's quite open, and there's just a couple of guitars and a vocal. So if I A/B the just the guitar with the EQ, you'll be able to hear some of the differences. So it's subtle, which is good because it means you haven't changed the tone too much, but it's just a slightly clearer image to it. And if we bring the bass guitar in alongside, you'll hear that a lot of the warmth, especially if you've got a bass guitar in the mix, can come from the bass. If you don't have a bass, maybe just don't cut out so much of that low mid. Maybe go down to 60 or 80 and not all the way up to 100. That will retain some of the warmth. So as you can hear, it's just about trying to fit the elements together. I mean, I prefer to have my guitars, my acoustic guitars, kind of above the bass guitar. If there's a electric rhythm guitar above that, or blended with it to add, depending on how the part is played, to add some definition to it. But any lead sound I prefer to have on top of the acoustic. Because a lot of the time in some of the more poppy arrangements, you'll have a kind of strums acoustic and then a lead electric, and it's nice to kind of layer in the acoustic underneath the lead, which is really this sort of EQ technique is really good for. If we hear it with the drums, you can hear how it really comes in and out of the mix with that EQ change. So again, it's subtle, but it just seems to sit a little bit nicer with those EQ adjustments. When it comes to channel compression, this is the Eventide Omnipressor, but it's any kind of VCA or FET kind of relatively quick release compressors work really well with acoustics. The LA2A can, or kind of that style can work, but I find it kind of flattens it a little bit too much for my taste. So this is set for 1176. 1177 was actually a stereo 1176, but it works really well with the acoustic. So as you can hear, you just want to bring out some of the sustain and just keep the acoustic present in the mix, because they get buried very easily, especially when you've got a lot of that kind of high frequency cymbals and singing and other things going on. So we have this other acoustic here, which is playing more of a lead part. So what I prefer to do when I'm working with two fairly similar sounding instruments that are playing together is I don't want to completely separate them. I just like to give them a little sonic character difference between the two of them. So to do that, I'm just going to copy across the EQs, because a lot of the cuts are going to be in the same places because it's still an acoustic guitar. But then in this case, what I'll try and do is brighten up the lead so it sits on top of and in front of the, in this case, the more rhythmic instrument. So I've just added a little bit of 1.5K, which it just brings in a little bit more definition in the high mids. It's kind of what I was hearing in this take is it's where the pick is that's where the pick sound is really, and it just adds that little bit of bite and gets it to cut through the mix a little bit better. The compressor is the same, because you do kind of want to I think you need to zone instruments together a little bit, so all my drums are using the same compressor, and it just helps tie the mix together a little bit before you even get to bus processing. So this is the same, and I'll fiddle with the threshold and get it sitting just right. And all I've done there is just added plate reverb, which I'll explain in a minute, and a small amount of harmonization from the Eventide H910. So this is an really old trick with reverbs. Reverbs tend to push things back in a mix, or smear. I kind of think of them as like a smearing effect. So to stop that happening, but still add ambience, if you put a very short delay in front of the reverb, it will it pushes the reverb away from the original sound, which can help retain the clarity of it. Also, another thing when you're doing stereo delays, make them slightly different times, because otherwise you don't hear the repeats. They mask each other. So if you have them slightly different, then it pushes and pulls and adds motion to the overall sound. Almost like a chorus, but very, very, very subtle. So as you can hear, it just adds a little bit of flavour to it. And then the harmonizer again, which has been used on countless records. Yes, have used it. God blimey, like everyone has used this, especially the older bands in the 70s and 80s. And what this is doing is it's basically it's using a delay and a pitch shifter, and you set it to an interval, a third, a fifth, or in between, and it delays and then plays back the delay through the pitch shifter, which gives you a doubling or a thickening effect. So on acoustic guitars, it sounds really good. And I am running that parallel, so it's not running into the harmonizer and then in delay, which means you're getting the width with the clean sound, and then you've got this very present doubled sound, more central than the reverb. And when you put them both through it with slightly different settings, it really adds a lot of space to the mix. And then the only other thing that I've got on the guitars at all is this LA3A, and that's on the subgroup or the bus, and all that's doing is just there to just control the peaks a little bit, and just you don't really want to hear this particular compressor doing anything to your guitars. It's more there to allow the mix bus compressor on the whole track to work a little bit more evenly, so you don't get any pumping or kind of big dynamic changes by the time you've got up to that last mix bus compressor. So if I play the whole track, and then I'll talk about the mix bus. So essentially, what I've got set up here on the first section of the mix bus is a 2-band filter, a high-pass, low-pass combo, which is set specifically to the response, the high-end and low-end response of my speakers, so that I know that whatever I'm hearing it is accurate to what my speakers can do. And then you've got the SSL bus compressor. This is the Brainworks one. For a long time I've used the Waves one, which is just as good. I'm just having a go with this at the moment. It seems to be giving me a better sound, a different sound. I always set my threshold at 0 because the concept here is it's supposed to control anything that would otherwise clip. So it's an insurance policy as opposed to anything sonic. Of course it changes the sound, but this is on through the whole mix, so I'm aware of it all the way through. 4:1 so that it does actually catch things and stop them. I don't use the 10:1, that's really for mastering and other things. And the 2:1, when you've got the threshold set so high, the 2:1 doesn't really catch anything. Very slow attack, in fact the slowest attack that you can set, and the slowest release. So it's just controlling things in a very subtle way, and 0 dB makeup because you want it to it's just a nice controlling layer just to make sure nothing clips as it's exporting or going through later things. After that you've got a saturation plugin that it's supposed to be modelled after the SSL, but what I find is it gives me something to push into when I'm mixing, in the same way that using an analog console would saturate more as you push into it more. As you can see, this is only, I'm getting 1 or 2 decibels of saturation. It's very subtle. And then we have an EQ afterwards. This is a stylistic thing, really. It's also important to note that the numbers on the boost and attenuation, they're not decibels, it's just out of 10. So there's probably 1 to 1.5 dB of boost at 60 here, and again the same at 12. And it's just to make sure that those two areas are consistent after the compression that it's just had. And then I have a some sort of imager. This is the SSL one currently. I've used the Wave Center Stereo. I believe Personas have one as well. Waves have a is it the imager, the stereo imager? They all essentially do the same thing, and that's widen the stereo image with clever phase. And again, this is just so that when I hear it on headphones or on speakers, I know specifically where my left and right is outside of just the position on my speakers. And then the last thing is a tape, a Kramer tape, and as you can see, it's not really doing anything. It just adds a little bit of warmth, and I'm used to hearing it on my mixes, and you know, I think it adds something. And seeing as we're here, I may as well solo the vocals as well.
And if he could feel a thing for me, well, but he got happy dreams, and he has faith in everything. Like heavens, I just can't believe it. But it gets a little harder to go there anymore, and to care when I pretend that I'm aware. I'm driving to the Rockies with only stars above to follow me, in the sky far from the sea. Going back to Lookout Mountain, going back to tell them it was me. Going home to Lookout Mountain, going back again, yes I believe.
So I hope that answers a few questions. I ended up doing a kind of how I mix video in the end, but yeah, to recap with the guitar stuff, it's really just about finding the elements in the sound that you've got that are causing the muddiness, and just getting rid of them. And if you've got a bass guitar, just don't be afraid to go all the way up to 80 or 100 hertz, because the bass guitar is living there anyway, and anything kind of under 60 in the bass guitar you want to get rid of, because that's where your kick drum typically lives, a bit 60 to 80 depending on how aggressive it is. So it's a bit of a jigsaw puzzle really, when it comes to these things. And this mix has got 7 guitars, and I'll have to go through and make decisions basically about where I want things to sit, and which parts I'm gonna cut out and put back in again. So yeah, I hope this has answered a few questions at least, and yeah, peace.